Welcome to the Journey to Fulfillment podcast. And today I have a special guest. His name is Kaejenn Tchia. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. I'm so excited about our conversation today. And
Me too.
Kaejenn, we met not too long ago, but we've been sort of in each other's shadows for maybe over a year or so. So I'm excited to have this conversation, and I'm really interested in got a really interesting background, which is why I would love to have you on the show today. So yeah, please introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Kaejenn, as Pauline said. I'm actually a dentist based in Darwin, Northern Territory. I've been a dentist now for almost 3 years. And I guess how Pauline and I got connected was that I started getting into the motivational coaching space about a year ago, basically following after a mental health episode where I had massive early career burnout a year ago when the pandemic hit. And what happened was that incident or that moment triggered a really deep personal development journey for me, which allowed me to thankfully find rebalance and harmony again in my career. But it also made me realize that my profession and the health profession in general doesn't have these important mental health conversations. And I wanted to be able to not just share my journey, but also be able to help other people who may be suffering in silence.
Yeah, and that's a great purpose, especially during these times, but in professions as well. Like I think mental health and just burnout is something that not only occurs in dentistry, but although it is probably quite, I've heard high suicidal rates and high stress because of the responsibility placed on them, but also across many different industries and obviously during these times. So we'll get into all of that as well. But I'd like to start off with, tell us where it all started, this journey of yours.
Sure. So let me take you back about a year and a half ago, where I was about 18 months into the job. My actual burnout, or what I call the fallout of how everything really came down, actually started about 18 months before that. So I was a final year dental student. And in your final year, before you become a graduate dentist, you spend majority of your final year on placement sites, treating patients in a public health clinic, and really kind of almost working like a graduate dentist, but you've got supervision from some seniors.
Mhm.
And so I did a second, so my first month stint, I was really lucky that my university was able to allow me to do a placement site back home in Darwin. So I actually thrived really well because I was home and things were really, really good. My second half of my placement, though, I was in a different environment, which was I moved to Townsville for 6 months.
Mm.
And in that 6 months, it was a lot. It was my first time being away from a normal home environment. So it was a place that I didn't really know. I knew some areas and I was staying with some family friends, but I didn't have a community around me like I had built from university in Cairns, where I studied, but also in Darwin. And I was also living independently kind of for the first time because throughout my entire uni career, I had the privilege of living on college for most of it. So most of my needs were provided for me and I didn't really need to cook for myself, that kind of thing. And
Mm.
so that 6 month was an introduction really to adulthood for me. But on top of that, there was also challenges professionally within my studies as well. And what happened was I started developing stress, panic attacks, and anxiety. And I got to the end of the year starting off really confident in the beginning of the year to the point of I wasn't actually sure whether I was ready to graduate.
Mm.
Now, from an academic perspective, I passed all my exams and everything was a-okay. And I was actually traveling still okay and passing things throughout my clinical. But it was more just the mental health trauma that I experienced. And I kind of was dreading, like, am I ready to go out there? And so graduation happened. It was obviously a really great experience. And, I kind of swept it under the carpet and said, I'll deal with that later, maybe. And so yeah, I pushed on, and that's all I've really known, kind of just pushing through and overcoming things, or what I thought I overcame it. And so 18 months into the job, I started getting new challenges as a clinical dentist working in private practice. And what happened was I was starting to get some triggers and nostalgia to that original kind of stress and anxiety and panic attacks that I had as a final year student. And I was getting this sense that, oh my God, this is happening again. But
Mm.
because I was now a graduate dentist, one of the things as well was that when you graduate as a dentist, I guess I had known I wanted to be a dentist since I was very young. probably be
Mm-hmm.
around maybe year 8, 9, 10.
Mm.
And I had set myself on the path. And when you follow a path that you've been dreaming of for, say, more than 5 to 8 years, and you hit that apex point where you've achieved everything you want to achieve, there's that, once you pass the peak of that summit, there's that entire abyss of unknown, which is, what do I do next?
Mm-hmm.
And I did have some goals in mind in terms of some career goals, but there wasn't really a set plan or structure I was following anymore. It was complete freedom for me to do as I wanted. And whilst that is both on one side, it's a really liberating feeling. On the other side, it was a bit chaotic for me because I'm always the type of person who loves following some sort of structure or
Mm-hmm.
knowing what's coming next. And so when I got hit and the pandemic hit in 2020, you know, I started to get these kind of feelings again of stress and anxiety. And what I started to notice was all of my pre existing coping strategies that I'd used thus far were no longer working. And
Mm-hmm.
it got to the point where I was having sleepless nights, fatigue, dreading going to work in the morning. Bear in mind, I also had some mindfulness practices already inbuilt, so I did do my meditation in the morning. But it got to the point where I would wake up anxious, do my meditation, which calmed me, come out of meditation and be anxious again. So it felt like there was no reprieve. And because of that, I really felt as if I was really starting to dislike and lose passion for my career. But I got to that really deep rooted fear, which I think a lot of people in the world sometimes get to, which is, I think they call it the number one global fear, which is that fear that I wasn't good enough to be a dentist. And the
Mm.
reason why I got down to that kind of really personal fear was because my mental health was now impacting my performance at work.
Yeah.
Because when I wasn't showing up to work in the best mental state, it meant that, I wouldn't necessarily be, paying as much attention as I needed to be. And
Mm.
that obviously in the health profession can sometimes lead to mistakes being made. Now, I'm
Yeah.
really, really fortunate that in the dentistry field, unlike in the medical world, we don't deal with a lot of life and death. And I'll still practice, and my primary focus for all my patients was always practicing safely. But
Mm-hmm.
I was starting to worry about whether my mental health was actually going to impact upon that. And
Mm.
so I started to retreat back rather than facing my fears as I started getting more and more clinical challenges, and these were compounding.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to this point where I was like, I'm so stressed. I'm so sick of feeling this way. Maybe I should think about quitting dentistry. Now, I've been always the type of person who never really quits. But I was kind of very pragmatic. And I said to myself, well, if you are going to quit, let's at least figure out a plan B, because you've created a lifestyle for yourself now that you're a dentist. And you need to maintain that lifestyle, and you need to be able to afford that lifestyle as well.
Mm.
And so I was like, it's all well and fair, but if you're going to pivot, you need to have a game plan about how you're going to transition from there. And that was around that time that I kind of discovered personal development. So
Right.
one of my personal mentors who kind of guided, when I say personal mentors, I've never spoken to him directly, but I call him a personal mentor because he was the pivot point of how I started my journey. And
Mm.
that was Tony Robbins. So Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi at the time were launching, because I think globally we were feeling this sense of uncertainty and dread. We were grieving a loss of normality in our lives.
Mm.
And they launched a thing called the Comeback Challenge, which was a 5 day free event where, now obviously because it was in US times, for Australians it was like at really weird shonky times of the day, so from like 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. and obviously I was working still. So I was tuning in after work. And what I started to notice by tuning into some of that personal development was, in a normal day where I wasn't tuning into something like that, there was always this kind of negative feeling, negative thought patterns that would carry from work to home, and it was starting to affect my relationships.
Mm.
But just by plugging into these couple days of training, I started to notice there was a physiological shift within me. One, I started to notice that things were starting to feel a bit lighter. Secondly, I was starting to feel some semblance of happiness and joy again, even if it was just momentary. Thirdly, I started to see hope. And that was a really big thing for me, because I knew that as long as there was a little bit of hope, I could really lean on that and hope that, if I can push through, and I knew that eventually if I could overcome this, that it would lead to something. I didn't know whether I was still going to quit dentistry, but it would lead to something more meaningful for me. And something, I've always been trying to chase a meaningful life of contribution. And that's really how I started off my journey becoming a dentist. And so I was like, if I'm not going to be a dentist, I still want to be able to serve someone in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that kind of then took me on that journey. And what happened was, after I did a few of these seminars, and the really transformative moment was this immersive event, because the other ones were kind of 3 days and 5 days, and some of them had recordings, and it was free to tune in live. And then they took the record, like they took the replays down after like 48 hours. But there was one event which you could get a ticket to called the World Summit. And that was a 3-day non-recorded immersive training with Tony Dean and a whole range of guest speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did was I blocked off time out of my work. So I think it was, for me, a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m., 12 hours immersive over 3 days. And that was my transformation point, because what I noticed was that everything that I had been putting into kind of trying to apply slowly and incrementally, I felt kind of free for the first time. So I was able to unshackle a lot of the belief systems that I had. But more importantly, I was like, actually, I think I can overcome this. I think I can gain some new skills, some new strategies, some new coping mechanisms, and some frameworks that I can actually tangibly apply to my clinical practice in my life, that's actually going to see positive benefits and effects. Around this time as well, I started sharing my story and vulnerability, because I've never really been. I'm grateful that I'm naturally quite a self-aware person, and in my life, I've always been really fortunate that I've been the shoulder that a lot of my friends and my peers always came to me for advice, or I used to, give, comfort people and also provide that support for them. So I was that kind of supportive
So
friend.
you are the rock.
Yeah, and it was kind of weird, because part of that belief system I had to erode was because I was always that beacon of strength for others. I thought that I wasn't allowed to show weakness myself, and that was the first belief system and identity I had to unravel and peel back and reveal that actually I'm just as human as anyone else,
Yeah.
and I'm allowed to feel the same feelings that everyone else is feeling.
Yeah.
So
That's
that
on
was really the
another
first
level.
realization for
Yeah.
my.
Before we go any further as well, because this is touching into some really interesting things that I want to dive further into, I want to just first of all, from what we've heard so far, it's been such a journey from you with, from the get-go, from getting into to even before you got into the job. So I just want to go back into some point you mentioned about contribution, and how that was something that, was a driving force for you to get into this industry, because this is something that I think people might be interested in terms of, why dentistry? Because there is so many vehicles, right, that people can contribute. It's such a it's a quality that I'm sure is something that people yearn for. But then as well, for you personally, what I'm curious, why was it about dentistry, or what was the moment that planted that idea in your mind that yes, dentistry is the vehicle for me for contribution?
So there was two things that drew me to dentistry. I had always wanted to go down a health pathway, and it was the classic medicine or dentistry kind of pathway. I'm lucky that my sister, who is 6 years older than me, she became a doctor. She was the first doctor in our family on both sides. And what I got to get a glimpse of was the reality of what that profession looked like. So she was contributing, but she was working long hours. She was doing night shifts, and her lifestyle was quite strenuous. And that part, I didn't really want to. It didn't sell that for me. When I looked at dentistry, I was lucky that in year 10, I did a work experience at the clinic that, funnily enough, talk about a full circle story, I'm now a dentist at. So this was more than 10 years ago. In that 1 week placement, what I saw was office-based hours. You could work Monday to Friday and even get your weekends back and get your evenings. No night shifts. But what really sold me was there was one case I saw where there was this patient who had been suffering depression, low self-esteem, hadn't smiled for over 20 years because she thought her teeth were horrible. and through a transformative treatment plan to get her smile and rehabilitate her smile to get it back up, to health again.
Mm.
When that final appointment was finished and she got her smile transformation or smile makeover, if you want to call it, the patient burst out crying.
Yeah.
It was a really emotional moment, but I could see in that moment that that patient's life was changed forever. And
Mm.
actually, a week later, because I then ended up working as a dental assistant throughout my high school years, which kind of gave me a little bit more insight into the industry as well, solidifying that I chose the right profession. But when I saw the patient later, she had a new hairstyle. She walked confidently. She was smiling. She got a new job. She previously was kind of in unemployment because she was fear of doing any job interviews
That's
because she was worried
incredible.
about her teeth.
Mm.
So I said, that one simple change and transformation for that patient has completely shifted the trajectory of that patient's life.
Mm.
And that kind of contribution and meaning to someone's life was massive to me. And I was like, if I can achieve this on a regular basis with people, that's the kind of contribution I want to make.
Wow, that is so cool, because I never thought about it that way. That yes, it's like the smile is really the essence of like one part of confidence for a lot of
The
people.
key
And
doorway
it's
to
on your
that,
face as well. So
correct.
it's not like
Yeah.
you can, not have it, or if you don't, it's pretty sad, isn't it? So
Mm.
wow, okay. That's awesome. Yeah, so I can see why that is such a motivating factor, having to see someone personally transform themselves through just being able to improve the way that their teeth looks as well, or their smile. Awesome. And then come to when you mentioned about the triggers, you were getting triggers for like the stress and anxiety as well, and then you talked about freedom.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting in terms of, there's a lot of people out there that, right now is a hot topic as well. Everyone wants freedom, but,
Yeah.
it's very broad in terms of what does freedom mean and what does it actually allow us, right? But for you, it sounded like it went in the opposite direction, in that you had so much freedom and choice. And then it's kind of like, getting a bit lost in it, or there wasn't any structure as well, and possibly even losing meaning. Can you talk to us more about, what is freedom and what that experience was like for you when you had it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Sorry, I'm dyslexic today. That you really asked it. We can probably edit that bit out. But when you asked me the question about what I consider freedom, what was that freedom moment for me?
Mm.
The true total freedom was actually unshackling myself from all of the traumas in terms of my sense of identity at that time. So I freed myself from saying I am not enough to actually I am enough and I can overcome this. That was one major shift in terms of freedom, knowing that I didn't have to live life in this traumatic, dark place for the rest
Mm.
of my life. I could make a decision to live my life a different way or overcome some of my fears. But it wasn't going to be comfortable, of course, and it never is. But I
Mm.
still had the choice. And I think when I realized that I had the choice, that was the freedom that freed those shackles for me. Because as you said, it was a bit reversed because I definitely had. So sometimes freedom, I like to think of freedom as a spectrum.
Mm.
On one end, you want to have enough freedom that you can make the choices you want to live and live life by your design and on your terms.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes when you have too much freedom, and what I mean by too much freedom, like overwhelmed with choice, then it becomes really difficult because you want to live a life on your terms, but you also want to be really selective of how you're going in one direction. Because if you can go in multiple directions,
Yes.
it's almost too easy to go in any. So you actually end up lost, even though there's freedom, because you're on the other side of the spectrum now, where you're not shackled by anything, but there's too much choice. So you're overwhelmed by choice.
Yeah, so the way that I'm seeing this is like if we're walking into a Starbucks store or
Mm.
any coffee shop that has a lot on the menu, is that it's kind of like that scenario where there's so much, and you walk into like a generalist store and there's so much on the menu, you don't know what to choose, even though you have the freedom of choice. but there's so many choices. And then versus yeah, so you can get quite lost in that, and maybe not taking any action, or not ordering, or just kind of stalling. But then on the other side, you could go into like a specialist store where they only have 5 different coffees, or like only a few items on the menu. So then you still have the freedom, but then it's within that sort of framework, or just, only a few things, which then makes your decision a lot easier potentially to quickly just choose something and then move forward. So anyway, it was an analogy that I was just like
I
thinking
love that
about.
analogy. It's so true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So you interesting that you can like you realize that for yourself, about that you could be like that, you are good enough versus like that you're not good enough. Was that through the Tony Robbins like comeback challenge that you sort of went there, or how did you sort of realize it within your own time as well?
So I have to say that it was guided. And Tony Robbins at the World Summit, so that 3 day immersive event was where things got solidified, because it was a culmination of a couple of things. And I'll go, I'm going to kind of speak to a few things that then culminated to the one point. On one hand, like I said before, I was starting to share my story with colleagues, because I recognized that if I didn't share my truth and my vulnerability, if people didn't know what was going on inside, it was very difficult for me to expect extra support and help. And so I had to have the courage to start to open up to people and share that I was struggling. What was really good was, as soon as I opened up, my entire practice supported me. They took patient load off me. They allowed me to take longer if I needed, and let me focus on things that brought me joy, or were things that I could manage in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, they suggested for me to go get extra help if I needed. But when I started sharing my story with some of my other dentists, and even now when I share my story, what was interesting was that so many dentists told me it was actually a common story. Almost every dentist I'd spoken to had burnt out at some stage. Now, that gave me reassurance to know that I wasn't the only one suffering from this. And I think for a lot of people, when you're in that crisis mode, that's the first thing you think of is, everyone seems to be doing so well but me. I must be the only one. That was the first sense of freedom, my first level of freedom, knowing that I wasn't the only one going through this.
The courage that you said in terms of being able to share and be vulnerable, it's not something that, like people just think about, like, oh yeah, like sometimes it's pretty hard to go through something. And then, especially in like, because of people's judgments and potentially different industries, have different ways of doing things. But particularly in your industry, or for you, having that courage to share, was an idea that you just thought, oh well, like I'm sort of fed up and I need to talk to someone about it? Or is it like, have you always kind of been that way, just to be open to sharing, because it's
I
pretty
think
difficult?
I've always been really open to sharing.
Right.
I've always been naturally vulnerable, because, and I say this because I'm very fortunate that my positive role models in life, I was raised by women my entire life. So I do have a father, obviously, in my life. But in terms of who I was raised by and who was my circle of influence, it was my mother, my sister, and my auntie. And so having that, and that's a completely different topic, but that strong feminine and female role to anyone's life, or especially to me, it taught me that you could be an emotional being and still be a person of strength. Not this idea that vulnerability is a weakness. They kind of, it wasn't, I didn't frame it that way until I got through personal development, but there was some semblance that it was okay to share how you felt. So there was that natural tendency. But on top of that, as you said, rightly so, I had hit rock bottom, and I was sick and tired of feeling that way. I wanted out of feeling this way. So I was willing to do anything it took to at least, and the other thing that as well was, when you vocalize something from internal, that is actually also one layer of freedom again, because as soon as you put it out into the ethos, or you speak it and you share it, one, you fully acknowledge it physically when you've said it. But secondly, because it's out there, you have to do something about it. See, if you keep it internally, something I've realized, when you bottle things up, you can choose to still hide it under the carpet. That's a choice you still have. The minute you bring it out, though, that choice gets taken away, because, well, choice gets taken away from the perspective that if you don't do anything about it, that shows your lack of accountability to yourself. And for me, one of my primary values in life is integrity. I like to be a man of my word. I don't make promises I can't keep. And so for me, being able to share the story was actually a promise to myself to say that if I can share this and actually, and again, me sharing was another coping mechanism of offloading, because if I didn't have some sort of transfer of energy from what was inside to the outside, that bottled up emotion, that was what was kind of killing me in a way. And so I had to let it out, and the best way for me was to share the story.
Yeah. So it's like almost like sharing the internalized energy within you and actually unleashing that so that the energy can then flow, which then obviously like you've said that it's actually, you found there was patterns in that a lot of people also experience the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot
So
of people,
how did that make you feel like after you found that out?
it made me feel two things. One, reassurance I wasn't alone. But two, and this is where we get to where I founded the Limitless Dentist, which is the platform now that I share. It made me realize that as a profession, we had accepted that it was the norm for people to burn out. Meaning there was nothing available resource. I never learned anything about mental health in dental school, nor is there really resources. Everyone focuses on the skill set of being a good dentist. No one ever taught me about the mindset of being a good dentist, or focusing the importance. And I always thought that in anything in life to be successful, it was all about the skills you had and the skills you could use to become. But it wasn't until Tony kind of completely reframed my mindset that he said, the key to success, and this thing called the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule. People think it's 80% skill set and 20% mindset. But when you've never done anything for the first time, in order for you to achieve, and say, whether it's walking for the first time, whether it's doing any new action, riding a bike, learning to swim, any activity, if you've never done it before and you don't have the skill set, you need to have that 80% mindset to believe you can do it, and your body will figure out the rest, and you will problem solve the rest to get to that end goal.
Yeah,
and
and it
when I
starts with a decision
realized
as
that,
well.
correct, yeah. And when I realized that, I was like, why didn't anyone teach me this in dental school? Why isn't this being spoken about more? And so I realized that there was this gap in our profession, and that was maybe the reason why there's still to this day a high suicide rate in dentistry, and why so many dentists are suffering in silence, because all we've been taught is this dogma that you just got to get better at your skills, or people were taking time off for like 6 to 12 months, which is fine, and I don't mind that. But for me personally, I couldn't afford to take 6 to 12 months off of my work, because that income was also supplying my lifestyle. So there was an incongruence there for me. I was like, how can I overcome this without having to almost semi-quit the job and then come back when I'm feeling better? And I was like, I also knew that there were really fulfilled dentists out there who were in harmony with their job. They loved their job. Their patients loved them. They were thriving. And I was like, if that is a case example and that's possible, why aren't more people like that? What's different about the way that they think that I'm not thinking, or what they're doing that I'm not doing? And that's what I started to look from the lens of, how can I create the fulfilling dental career of my dreams by my design that is not necessarily conformant to whatever sort of norm, but is purely customizable, but more importantly, because it is personal to me, that's where the fulfillment comes in, because it's like, I feel like I'm on the right path because it was my decision and my choice. This whole time I thought I was living a lie. This kind of another thing that we look at in dentistry right now is not only burnout, but this thing called imposter syndrome, this fake it till you make it kind of thing. And I think anyone in life, not just dentists, but especially health professionals, there is this notion that you do need to fake it till you make it. And so a lot of people experience imposter syndrome, where they feel like they're inauthentic to themselves until they can have some sort of baseline confidence where they insert or they replace their self, like they put themselves back into that kind of character or persona. So yeah, imposters. I was also suffering imposter syndrome as well.
So for you though, in terms of you mentioned about the mindset,
Yeah.
mindset side, and then how you saw the the like for other fulfilled dentists. So when you went to explore, what did you find like to help you bridge that gap as well?
So what I found was that the people who had the most fulfilling dental careers, and when I say fulfilling, that's not to say that every day was a good day. So they still had their bad days. They had still experienced burnout, but what they still had was longevity in their career. So they didn't quit. More importantly, in that long period of time, when you look at the trend, even though they had sections that were traumatic and challenging and where they wanted to quit, something still made them really thriving, but more importantly, they still felt, in essence, like that the choice that they made to continue was the one that they enjoyed. And when I look at it, it comes from two things. One was they made it like they had a goal and I guess a pathway to follow, which again solves the problem that I was having where I was lost and I didn't know where to go. I was like, should I specialize or what do I do? Am I in the right sector, private practice? Should I go into public?
Mm.
Am I doing the right thing? Do I need to move away from home and get other experiences? The second component was they practice a lot of self care.
Mm.
They
I
have
bet I do.
habits
Yeah.
ingrained in their routine. They only work 3 or 4 days a week. They make sure that they've got hobbies that they love outside of dentistry. And that was the other thing too, where, as dentists, and not only dentists, it happens in every profession, but
People, yeah.
especially in the health field, we don't tend to leave work at work. We tend to sometimes bring work home. And especially in the advent of social media, there's a lot of dental community forums and Instagram now. Everyone's showing cases of amazing smile transformation. So dentists are always plugging into dentistry, whether they're in the clinic seeing a patient or not. And that, in a way, means that when your entire identity becomes a dentist, the minute something goes wrong in dentistry, what you do is you equate it to your self worth, which is what I did. Not
Mm.
realizing that your identity is a multifaceted thing, where I wasn't just a dentist, I was a son, I was a brother,
Mm.
I was a best friend, I was a support to someone. I
Mm-hmm.
had forgotten about that because all I thought that mattered in terms of my um, what I equaled to my self worth was I a good dentist?
It was almost like a attachment to the status or the title
Yeah,
of your identity.
yeah,
And then when you're in the bubble, it's like, especially now, yeah, I didn't know that about the social media and being plugged in and all the things. Um, that yeah, that can be all consuming. Then you like can't do any like you don't do anything else like apart from just being a good dentist.
yeah. People
Yeah.
think about teeth even at home. They'll go from looking at teeth in the day to looking at other people's teeth at night and seeing
Yeah.
other people's cases. And more importantly, that then brings in a sense of comparison syndrome. Like, oh, that looks amazing. I can't do work like that. I must be a failure.
Mm.
And so
So
it perpetuates this imposter syndrome again and fears
yeah.
and self-doubt.
I actually thought about that as well, like about how if you would, because I mean, I'm just thinking about it from like a normal person where when I'm looking at teeth or pictures of teeth, obviously I'm not a dentist, but when I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, wow, like if you do this for a job and you're looking and all you're doing is in this position, you're sitting and you're looking all day doing the procedures, that I thought maybe I could go crazy, like just like like it just embeds in your mind like these images day after day. That's all you're looking at. um yeah, that's why it's obviously not for everyone, but I'm just thinking how do you actually you said about the self-care or like taking away from it, doing other things. Yeah, how do you break that? Because some people could go insane. I don't know if that contributes to potentially the suicide or the stress or whatever, when maybe you can't sleep because all you're thinking about is these images or the teeth, or like worrying about the next patient, or if you stuff something up. Yeah. Tips, advice, insights on the
Yeah.
self-care side?
The self care side is really you want to begin to find things that you can enjoy and get passionate about outside of dentistry. Because for me personally, all I was working hard towards was dentistry. But I knew I had other passions. One of my passions is like leadership. I work in a lot of non-for-profit organizations outside of dentistry and do a lot of volunteering, work in committees, and I also work with the Australian Dental Association, which is our advocacy body.
Mm.
So I knew I had passion, and that was really the other thing too. Was I was exploring other avenues when I was thinking about quitting dentistry because I was like, I am super like depressed and like I'm super low energy when I'm at work. But the minute I think about something else that I'm passionate about, I'm fired up. Like life is great. So I was like, where's the
Happy
where's the
medium.
mismatch happening here?
Yeah.
Why? How can I be so happy in the same day doing one thing that I know I'm confident in, right? And I've got a baseline level of knowledge and I know I can achieve, and then go back to another thing where I feel completely incompetent and inept and feel completely lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of self care is really figuring out and delving into yourself and figuring out what things or skills or hobbies. And again, this is a lot of times it's a trial and error thing. When people talk about self care, there is no right or wrong way to do self care. That's something I've realized.
Mm.
It is, but it needs to be intentional. I think that's the key to good self care. Is self care has to be intentional. What I mean by that is if you choose to say learn to paint or draw,
Mm.
it's really important that you walk into that hobby, especially if you also have never drawn before and you're just exploring this and see if you won't like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important you don't bring all the biases and presumptions of trauma you've just left and bring it into this new avenue. Meaning, if I was to think about doing, I know a lot of people do those paints and creates where you drink
Yeah.
wine and you do create, and I'm hoping to do one in the next
Sip
month
and
or so.
paint.
Sip and paint, yeah, it looks
Yeah.
really really fun. I mean, I don't drink wine. I'm happy to drink like a ginger beer or something. But this idea that it's a social gathering and there's a structure and you're just enjoying being in a social interaction and you can have no. It's almost like paint by numbers. You don't have to have any painting skills and you can create this amazing artwork.
Mm.
And so something like that is guided or like that may be better. But it's really important that if when you go into anything towards self care intentionally, that you don't judge it with the same lens that you would otherwise judge other things. So it's like you need to be able to find a space within yourself where you can be completely non-judgmental, but almost like explorative. So this could go wrong. If I do my first drawing and painting, it may become like it looks like one of those, abstract paintings that colors
Yeah.
everywhere.
Okay.
But it's like the purpose of you painting isn't to judge whether or not you're a good painter to see whether this is a good hobby for you. If it
Mm.
doesn't bring you joy while you're doing it, that should be a good indication whether or not that self care thing is right or wrong for you. Because there
Here's
are
the
always
thing.
things you know that you enjoy, whether it's hanging out with friends, and usually actually enjoying an activity is less about the activity and what I tend to find more about the emotions you associate with the activity.
Here's the thing, right? When you said about going into the activity with a certain judgment or presumptions, like you got to leave that all behind. Um, I can see where within the work as a dentist potentially that there's a sense of perfectionism
Yes.
that's at play because you have to be quite accurate in what you're examining, diagnosing, treating. The whole procedures has to be on point, otherwise someone's nerve or someone's mouth is going to be in a lot of pain, right? So obviously if you're doing that as a profession, and spending a lot of time in it, you're going to develop this natural perfectionism where everything has to be to the T, because that's what you do for work. That's where you spend most of your time in your life. Then you can, like you're saying, you can bring that into other areas. So if it's an exploratory activity such as the painting, you might go in there thinking that, like, again, because you're an artist as a dentist potentially, that you have to, it has to be a certain way or a certain structure, or it has to look a certain way. Yeah, how do you manage that? Or like, it's not easy to someone to just let that go when they're, trained that way. They're looking at things, the details all the time.
Yeah.
And that's where you don't get the freedom, because you're like, oh, I'm constantly judging, or I'm comparing someone's teeth with someone's teeth, like it's all aesthetics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It's amazing you came to that conclusion, because that's actually one of the things I talk about the most through the Limitless Dentist is the perfectionist mindset and why that is the number one thing that riddles most dentists. it is perpetuated because it's a cultural thing, as in that's the way that dentistry has progressed in a way. The way in which I debunked or deconstructed perfectionism for myself, right, or a perfectionist mindset, and how I got rid of a perfectionist mindset was choosing progress over perfection. So my KPI or my success indicator for whether or not I did something well or had a good day, mostly about a good day, because I try not to judge individual tasks, but I think about how I felt in the day, because at the end of the day, that's what matters, not what you did, but how you felt, because that carries on in terms of long-term memories and belief systems. So I always say to myself now, um, I ask myself two questions at the end of the day now to qualify whether I had a good day. Did I serve to my highest level? As in, did I bring the best of what I have today to the job? And two, did I have a meaningful contribution conversation with any patient? It didn't have to be a result tied to a procedure. But I deal with a lot of help work with a lot of anxious patients, because there's a lot of dental phobic people of the population out
Oh,
there who,
yes.
unfortunately, due to the forefathers of our profession, dentistry was quite barbaric. Local anesthetics weren't as good as then. People used to like strap children to chairs, take their teeth out. Like a lot of people went through a lot of trauma. And so my generation, or the generation of dentists now, are now having to try and unpack all of that and try to build confidence in people to come to see us again.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the most fulfilling things that I do in my career to date is actually not the procedures I can just achieve for my patients, but actually making my patient feel safe and heard in the dental chair for either the first time in their life or the first time in a really long time.
What do you mean?
And,
I know the safe part. Okay, I understand.
mm,
But then what do you mean by heard? Because most of the time, like when we go in, we have to have our mouth open. We can't really talk. Explain that.
Heard in the sense of um, a lot of times when people say stop, that's a really important thing, like boundaries.
Mm-mm.
Some dentists just think, no, let's just get the job done because otherwise you're not going to come back. And there is a level of making sure that when my patients, I always kind of, and this is more going into the dentistry things, but in terms of managing anxiety in my patients, I always say to my patients, I'm not in control of the treatment, in the sense that in this appointment, you're in control. Meaning, if you need a break and you need to stop, once you communicate that, I will respect that. Meaning, I want you to, that's how you build the trust, is that, when you say something, I will follow through.
Mm-hmm.
Because the minute, if they say stop and I just keep on going, ignoring them,
Yeah.
I've already eroded that. You keep on eroding that level of trust, because how can that patient expect you're doing what's best for you if they can't even acknowledge or respect a simple wish like taking a break
Mm.
or something like that? So that's what I mean by heard as well, in the sense that not just safe, in the sense that even when they voice things or they speak about specific concerns, really listening to their entire story, and not making them feel like they're crazy, not making them feel like what they're thinking is ridiculous, because there is no ridiculous things. I think there's only misunderstood and understood,
Mm-hmm.
or misinformed and informed in anything in life. And so being able to take a patient on an education journey to show them what's possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to first establish this basis that, okay, I can actually openly share my true thoughts. And when they do that, it then allows me to figure out what is the best treatment plan for them. Because, like I said, there's so many different ways you can transform a person's mouth and life and smile.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important that you tailor it to what their expectations and what their dreams and goals are, and you don't just do a cookie cutter approach to everything.
Yeah, I love those two principles. I think that goes for anything really. If you're dealing with anyone, just general care and concern. Yeah. Okay. Um, and maybe now, because you mentioned it earlier as well, might as well go into the imposter syndrome, because
Yeah.
I think that that's probably something that, like you said, healthcare professionals would experience, depending on what environment it is. Because partially because of the perfectionism that is within certain healthcare professions. So yeah, share with us about what is imposter syndrome, and yeah, how does it affect you, and how do you get over it, sort of thing.
So the imposter syndrome phenomenon, which is like a phenomenon because it can happen over multiple like it is an identity you assume, where when you are not at the level you wish to be, you assume as if you were, or act as if you were at that level first, and then figure out the skill set to then be that thing. And there's this always. I remember I used to say this a lot in dental school, and I didn't. And to be honest, part of me, I'm still learning about imposter syndrome phenomenon. So I never want anyone who's tuning into this to think I'm an expert, because I'm still on a learning journey. And if there is something that I say that is actually misrepresented or wrong, and someone who knows more, please make sure you share that, because I'm always learning and wanting to be corrected. But as far as I understand, what I used to say to myself was fake it till you make it. And I read this amazing article by this mental health advocate, and I believe she has a psychology background, and she's on Instagram. And it was actually another dentist who, since I've been doing the Limitless Dentist, she works with women or female dentists to just completely deconstruct, overcome burnout, but deconstruct imposter phenomenon. So when I, through the power of proximity, got exposed to her Instagram account, she linked this article, or did produce content in this article, that completely changed my mindset. And this only happened about 3 months ago, where I used to think that saying fake it till you make it was okay. But it wasn't until when I really dialed back and reflected what this article reflected was, when you say fake it till you make it, what you're actually doing is subconsciously undermining how much courage it takes to do something that you've not done for the first time. Meaning, by saying the word fake, and it's because words have power, right? What you're also doing is you're saying that you doing this is inauthentic in some way, because you're faking it. You're not being the real you. You're in being an imposter, or you're creating a persona that is not authentically you. And so what she delves into this article, and I'm happy to share it to you as well if you want to share the link so people can understand
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But because it was an article written by a lady called Alison Shamir.
Okay.
And she says, instead of saying fake it till you make it, we need to start saying brave it till you make it. Because what we want to acknowledge is that in that moment where we don't know what to do, or we're not at that level, that's actually the norm, and it's okay. That's part of that reassurance. That's not the problem. The problem is if you undermine the courage it takes to yourself in that self-reflection, to say, actually, not everyone has the courage to brave it till they make it. So what you want to do is use a positive reinforcing word, thought, pattern, emotion, not associate with a negative subconscious, even, and something that we don't even think about, that on the background can perpetuate unknown or unconscious negative thought patterns that then can lead to more self-doubt, stress, anxiety, feelings that I'm not enough. All of those things can come in.
Yeah, that's a great reframe. Very positive as well, rather than the fake to the brave. That's something that I think that's already a solution within itself. When you start to think differently, then everything else changes, in terms of, like you said, when you're doing something new, or you're just doing an activity that potentially that level of competence hasn't, or compared to others, maybe you feel like you haven't got that yet. But when you're reframing it, instead of like, I'm being a fraud, or I'm being fake, inauthentic, I'm actually being brave, then you're really taking your power and stepping into the unknown, embracing whatever comes your way.
Full ownership.
Yeah. Yeah. That's courage as well. When you take bravery into full ownership, courage.
Yeah. Yep. And bravery is really just courage that is a habit that you execute, that you're unconsciously competent and confident in, because you've done it so many times. In terms of that Dunning-Kruger effect, when you go from, unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to unconscious competence, and then, or conscious competence to unconscious. And so on that spectrum, when you're constantly taking that action. And that's why there's this one phrase I always tell myself every day, that action cures fear, because that's really how I solved and overcame all of my problems, was
Mm.
taking that uncomfortable action in spite of all my fears. And when I got to the other side, what I was rewarded with was that sense of, hey, I did it.
Mm.
I got courage and confidence, because that was the payoff, because it was messy and it didn't feel right, and I wanted to run away. But because I said to myself, no, I had hope and faith that there was going to be light at the end of that tunnel. And I just haven't looked back since.
Mm. And here you are
And here we
as
are.
well. Haven't run away yet, still
No,
here.
that's it.
In terms of like, so now that you're here, come forward, what are you working on these days?
Yeah. So on the side of working as a full-time dentist, my transformation journey, when I realized that there was a gap in my profession, I was like, and also the World Summit was also how Tony and Dean launched what they call the self-education revolution. So in the pandemic, they were showing people how you could actually become you could essentially get into the business of self-education, which is a huge wave that's happening at the moment. And you can essentially sell your knowledge, or create a business around sharing your mess and serving people, making an impact, but also financially benefiting from as well. And I was like, that's a really interesting way of having a business that I never thought about.
Mm.
And so when I was like, well, what would I do? And again, this was from the mindset of, if I'm going to quit dentistry, what else should I consider doing? Then I was like, well, if there are so many dentists out there that are struggling, and I've got these mindsets and tools that not every dentist knows because they didn't walk the journey I walked. But if I can shorten that journey, or again, the main message of the Limitless Dentist is to be it, like, my main goal to know that everything that I've done was worth it, is if I could just save one colleague's life from that point where they think that there's no way out and they think that they need to take their own life to get free, right? To know that even one piece of content that I may have shared, or one thing that they heard about me, may not have been the thing that transformed them, but then took them towards getting the help they needed to get them on that transformation path and the way out, and a really positive comeback story, right? I think that is, in terms of the impact and contribution, right? Going back to what I said in terms of living a life of significance and contribution, there is no greater contribution than having someone's life transformed in a way that, what I do is, I don't get to just impact my patient circle, but because I was able to transform or help in any way that person's life, they can now continue to transform other people's life in their communities. And so that kind of broader reaching impact, which is what I'm trying to achieve in life, I get to tick that box. But when I was coming to kind of this idea, I was like, well, what should I call it? What would the framework be? And then I read this awesome book by Jim Quick called Limitless, which is one of my favorite personal development
He's
books.
awesome. Yeah.
He is so cool, and I've got it right next to me. But I can't show it because otherwise the virtual background will go funky. But when I read the book, I was like, that is so true. Like, this idea that being a limitless anything, person, learner, dentist, student, it's a mindset that you need to adopt, but not just, because I think when people think about mindset, they think it's like a lot of like corny, airy fairy kind of things. But what they don't understand is it's really a set of guiding principles and framing the way you see things and perspectives that, when you action them, what they do is they help you overcome fears, but they help you push through the current ceiling that's stopping you or preventing you from your version 2.0 or your version 3.0. That's there. It just hasn't been tapped into. So I was like, the Limitless Dentist sounds really cool. So that's where the Limitless Dentist name came from. So, Jim Quick, if you ever see this video, thank you so much. And, I've been speaking and manifesting that one day I would love to meet him and be able to get a signature on his book and get a photo with him.
Jim Quick, come sponsor my podcast.
Yeah, that's support Pauline's podcast as well. So that was how the Limitless Dentist. And then in terms of the framework I teach, one of the trainings that I did when I got into this kind of self-education revolution and really invested in not only learning about personal development, but the business of personal development,
Mhm.
I realized that I created this kind of 6-step framework, which I'm still road testing and I haven't really launched any programs yet, but I'm trying to find out whether it does fit with my niche. But so far, it is working in terms of how you go from burnout or beginning to feel burnt out or beginning to feel stressed out, or you don't know where to go, you're lost, to a sense of freedom and fulfillment. And basically, it's a 6-letter word, belief, funnily enough.
Oh, okay.
And it's a stepwise framework where I'll share the quick steps really because it's not proprietary, and I'm happy for people to share it around. But you start with either the beginning point or burnout, and then it's really really important that you then go through. You talk about energy because the first thing people have in that state of fear, anxiety, self doubt, imposter phenomenon is low energy, and you need to have a higher level of energy in order to actually action change, do something that's uncomfortable. Because if you have low energy, you just want to sit there and wallow. You don't want to move.
Mhm.
And so the next thing we talk about is how you can create energy within you or tap into energy. Because one of the things I realized was I thought that if I just got more sleep, I would feel less exhausted. But I
Yeah,
was getting 8 hours, 10 hours of sleep, and still waking up exhausted because mentally,
lots of things. Yeah.
I was overwhelming my brain with all these negative thought patterns and impulses.
You
So
couldn't
the next
recover.
thing we talk about is energy. And then the middle point, which is really where the breakthrough starts, is going through what we call limiting beliefs.
Mhm.
And what are the lies I call, which is actually a framework that Jim Quick teaches, which is um, limited ideas entertained. And what are the limiting ideas or what are the limiting beliefs and belief systems? Because really, it's a set of systems of beliefs and stories you tell yourself. What are they? What are you telling yourself on a daily basis that's stopping you from your next best level? Once we go through that, we then go into this idea of identity and inner drivers. So really, then trying to go back in and saying, well, this is where you are, and you kind of know where you might want to be, or we actually talk about where you want to be and starting to build a compelling future. They say once you know where the compelling future is, now you've got to figure out what is going to drive you to get to there, or what are some values that you know that are core to you that you've always known, but you just never you never did an exercise to think about it and put it out on
Mhm.
paper. Once you know what your inner drivers are, whether it's for not just dentistry but for life and getting that zest for life back, then you need to couple that with emotion, because really emotions are what help us. They are what make our long-term memories short-term memories. More importantly, they are what allows us to uh, get past our primordial programming or our ancestral programming of fight or flight, and how we're able to still do things we didn't think were possible and get past that initial reflex to keep ourselves safe, which is obviously, it's a reflexive thing and it's not something that you should feel shame about,
Mhm.
but you can get around it and still on decision and on command execute things by understanding how emotion plays into action and how emotion plays into life experience.
Mhm.
Once you get to that point, you then get to the final point, which is freedom and fulfillment. And that's where you solidify, action goals of, where do you want to be? What does that look like? So manifesting that before it's happened. And then knowing all of those kind of things where we've started to unshackle those limiting beliefs, knowing the new beliefs that you need to take and knowing the new identities you need to create and new drivers you can anchor into, and also know how you can manage your emotions, which is really one of the things I realized was I was really self-aware, but I had really poor self-management skills. So it's good to have a level of self-awareness, but if you don't have the management tools to manage that self-awareness, you also don't get anywhere in life. And so
Mm.
being able to manage and titrate when things aren't going well and getting to it's always that constant, okay, things aren't going well, let's pivot, let's adapt, try something different, and try to keep some level of harmony and balance, which is, it is every single day, it's an intentional fight against yourself.
Mhm.
But then you get to the end point, which is freedom, fulfillment, and creating an action plan, I guess you could say. Because, everyone knows that when you create an action plan and you follow it, if you
That's when
don't
the
change what you're
results.
currently doing, you can't expect to see different results.
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful beliefs. I really like that one. Where can people find you or more about this program or framework?
Yep. So I'm still in the midst of kind of creating the I guess the course or what it's going to look like. But at the moment, where people can find me is on social media at the Limitless Dentist. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. Oh, actually, LinkedIn. Sorry, I'm on Twitter, but I do share things. But I'm most active on Instagram and Facebook. I do have a private Facebook Limitless Dentist Facebook community for dentists only, where it's a community I've created of like-minded dentists who are interested in personal development, but more importantly, are going through traumas and creating a safe environment where people can share vulnerability. I share my journey. Instagram is probably the best way you can reach out though, because every Saturday or every week, I go live on Instagram sharing content and also try to do some interviews here and there. But really, that's the main space where I share my mindset. Because here's the thing, it's really important to me at the Limitless Dentist in terms of the ethos of this business passion project. I never want anyone to think that I'm an expert or don't realize that I too am a work in progress. And that's really something I always say, that I am just as much of a student as much as I am a teacher. And that anything that I share to other people are things that I'm applying to my own life and I'm seeing the results.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when you take people on a journey and show that authenticity, but most importantly, too many times on social media, all we see are the highlight reels. And we
Yeah.
never see the messy middle of where someone started to how they got to a point of success.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to share that messy middle and getting people invested in that journey and being okay with that and to be able to share their messy middles, there is something so powerful and empowering to anyone to be able to have that sense of it's okay to share your messiness on social media, because what that shows is that we are human, but more importantly, that's really how life is lived, not in the beautiful picturesque moments that are with the perfect filters, with the wind on your
Mm.
hair and the
'Cause our life
sun.
isn't a highlights reel, like we are all on this journey as
Absolutely.
well. And hence my podcast, how fitting.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's been so interesting. And I've just really appreciated and admired like your courage in, sharing like what it is that you do and what you've been through, not only here, but in the work that you're doing with the community. I'm sure that you're going to be, and you are making an impact to a lot of other people within the dentist world out there. So yeah, I just wanted to tell you that I'm really grateful for you to be on and to keep sharing your journey as well. And yeah, thank you for all the wisdom. And I've definitely I found this was really fun for me, and I've learned so much about, like, you're very articulate in all of the things that you share, not only from your experience, but you're someone who leads by example. So that is something to be really proud of. But yep, I want to just leave you with two last questions before we finish up here. And the first one is, at this point in your life right now, and from what you've learned so far, what does fulfillment mean to you?
So fulfillment to me is knowing that I am living my best life with intention by my design. So not living life like someone else is living it, but knowing what my core values are, what I stand for, and more importantly, knowing what I'm working towards and being in a complete alignment to those things and being congruent to those things. That's what true fulfillment means for me, because I know that if I'm congruent with my dreams and my goals, that are also congruent with my values that I anchor towards, and also are congruent with my circles of influence and the people I surround myself,
Mm.
that is the level of harmony that gives you long-term fulfillment, because it's really easy to go into periods of fulfillment and go back in waves of burnout fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about how do you play that long game where you able to, over a long period of time, and again, not going to be messy, it's going to be messy, never going to be perfect, you always choose progress, but really getting to a point in life where, you know what, I embrace failure, I embrace change, I embrace challenge, because I know that with the skills that I have and what I've proven to myself from previous experiences, I can get through it and still live to see that sunny day or that compelling future that is what I perceive as my fulfilling future.
Beautiful answer. And lastly, if it was your last day on earth, hypothetically, but if it
Mm.
was and your last moments, what is the message that you would like to leave the world with or leave the audience with?
I would say if it was your last moment or last day on earth, share compassion and love, because there is never, what I have noticed is gratitude is really the cure all for all anxieties that and anything in traumas in life. You can never feel gratitude and anxiety. You can never feel burnout when you're feeling true gratitude. So practicing gratitude, if I was to do one thing, last thing on earth, it would be to practice gratitude and to thank and be thankful for the life that I did live, and the amazing things I got to experience. Because knowing that when you express that gratitude and you send that positive energy out into the universe. I do come from a Buddhist background. I believe in karma. When you share the good vibes around, the good vibes eventually then come back to you. And so, I always like to end things on a really positive, really vibrant note. And so, yeah, my one tip is share the love, share the compassion, and most importantly, be grateful.
Mm. And I think you've accomplished your mission so far on this podcast. Is that thank you so much for your contribution today. And I'm sure, if anyone has any questions, please reach out to Kaejenn. I can drop all the links in the show notes as well. But yeah, appreciate your time and thank you all for tuning in. Until next episode, thank you, Kaejenn, and good night.
Thank you.